So one might say there's a kind of education that is more primordial, although it still counts as a kind of nomos than paideia, and that in the beautiful passage in Odyssey, where Odysseus recalls his early experiences with his father in his father's garden, the Garden of Laertes, in order to prove that he is Odysseus to the old man, who's, after all, he can't, even though he's inspected the birthmark and so on, it convinces him more when he hears about this recollection. It seems that there's in the example of the repeated explanations about what's happening in the Garden of Laertes to the remembered youthful Odysseus. Obviously, this is the kind of education which Platon and the post-Orphics are putting down. And so in a way, this is on the side of the ethnos and the Dugin side, what they're putting down. But at the same time, Dugin has a foot in the Platonic vision, Platonic revelation, as obviously his daughter was Platonova. What's the distinction here? So one is when you read it, I mean, in a crude kind of binary, we could say 2 points of view. Once you read it from the point of view as we're now constructing it, doing philology, which artificial intelligence cannot do. We're doing something artificial intelligence can't do, philology. We're considering matters such as what's the distinction between metaphor and the literal. What is the literal? What is the metaphorical? We're making distinct. We're just saying, oh, something's missing from this sentence. What's meant to be understood? Elliptical sentences. We're saying, here, is this to be understood as a technical term, or is this to be understood in the Koine Greek? The Koine Greek, according to what era? Here we have a scholarly reference to Aristotle, but was it read out of the Byzantine version of Aristotle, the Arabic version, in all embarrassment, the current version, the medieval version of the schoolmen? Which version? The old the school to Plato at Venice, the old schools of the private patricians who kept with the Platonic tradition even after the time of Justinian's decree in their private houses, as in some way we can infer from what Peter Brown teaches, because Peter Brown says that even though there was this big edict that says, oh, now the Roman Empire is all of a sudden gone gay or gone Christian or something. Rather, like Cary Grant says that in the so-called screwball comedy, Bringing Up Baby with Katharine Hepburn. He jumps up and says, oh, I've all of a sudden gone gay. But it's like, did the whole of the so-called Western Empire just like go Christian all of a sudden? What could that possibly happen? So it actually, even where it was known, like, you're supposed to be following Justinian's code now, you're supposed to be Christian now, there's plenty of people kept their old pagan traditions. So we could say there's also probably this Aristotelian tradition of the sort of hidden pagans, just as the Jews were hidden amongst Moors in the centuries before they were emancipated by Napoleon. It's conversos. there's something nice about that in that Villard's, the author that did the Cruel Tales, about sort of the mentality of this period, which is so beautiful just because it's so sincere about from the side of view of the Judith Butler side. They go, we're colonizing, and they're hitting us with this goddamn phantasm of the Maloney, and how could Maloney actually believe in this Catholic way of life or something, or whatever the sort of cool version of being Catholic is, as exemplified by Maloney. How could that be taken seriously in the same way the Catholics who were persecuting, throwing in dungeons these conversos, and then saying, yeah, but don't you want to really realize that we're trying to help you, that we're trying to teach you the true faith? So we have this situation where, yeah, there's two different kinds of educations showing up, but what I want to get to here is one, this thesis, AI can't really do philology, because there's all these crazy questions that aren't just questions of like just saying, and even philology in the following sense, keeping a conversation going with Aristotle. So like I just named a bunch of the problems, like there's different Aristotles, and even the access to any of this Averroes, Aristotle, whatever, whoever's Aristotle you want, or whichever genre, because there's like all the people influenced by Thomas's Aristotle, etc., etc. There's all kinds of Aristotles floating around, and then how can AI deal with this? Okay, you could, in certain cases, we could see how there could be certain stepwise progressions towards this sort of different iterations of is the AI really interpreting, or is AI really keeping a conversation going with Aristotle? Is it really in a certain way biting through what Leo Strauss called the second cave, where all these different clusters of strong, supposedly clear interpretations of Aristotle are transmitting to us, which somehow this is the second cave complex of history, of the history of our discussion with the ancients and of classical philology, or the thing that the human being Sir Dawson claimed to still be able to do, which AI can't do. To some extent you could like do algorithm programs to get it to give answers more like what we like, but then then it's always like the overlord situation, where does the overlord like this answer? And then the end question would be, one question would come up, well, what if the people that are supposedly the best in the field like the answer that Grok is giving, the latest version of Grok is giving, better than they like the answer a special idiot like Zizek is giving, for instance? That's not that hard, because we usually aren't really very satisfied with any interpretations given by any of the current living thinkers, unless it's Heidegger, or unless it's somebody who's once in 100 years. Even with Strauss, Strauss mostly doesn't do concentrated philology, or concentrated saying this is what Aristotle really thought on the matter, or this is what the Greeks really thought on the matter. He more sort of directly brings things to a ground that he claims straddles our current ground and straddles the past. His whole contact with Cicero is kind of like that. What does Cicero say that still has an immediate cogency, such as that if you're on a ship and you throw off the human beings instead of the expensive cargo, does that make you seem inhuman? Um, it's interesting that Strauss's view on that, this is sort of a point of common law. Like everybody hears about that, and then you can interpret it as in realist terms because people hear about that and it makes the country lose their national self-respect. Kind of went into a reverie because I'm thinking, like, are Americans losing our national self-respect, or did we have it during my lifetime? And I don't really know the answer. But let's just push on with this inquiry. Yeah, the philologist's work. It's difficult to see how that who gets to decide whether the thing that Brock is doing is correct. Like we're the only yardstick on that. Now let's look for just a second at so if you look at, for instance, in the locus, you see a negotiation over what the word courage should signify, like whether. So then there's this move from the sort of Garden of Laertes version to the Plato's music as the earliest education version that was given in the Nomoi, or as mentioned in the Nomoi. When you see the way Aristotle, when you see the way courage is negotiated as between saying a lion can have courage, which you could get from pointing it out, and people just have the sense that a lion has courage, from saying no, courage must involve some part of logos or some part of dianoia. So remember, we gave that example from Xenophon about a certain instruction was given to the troops, basically saying we're going to faint, we're going to fall back, but you must remember all the time that this is fake. We're pretending to fall back, but then only to then later charge forward once the enemies kind of got into our web. And this dianoic act, this noetic act, it's something that becomes part of what they're trying to, Nicias, the sort of iconoclast, is trying to force to be the proper usage of the word Andrea or courage, or Andrea or courage. And then Socrates is kind of standing over it saying, well, look, we've got these two views. Let's have the negotiation about these two views. I myself am no longer give birth to anything. I only observe and help along as the coach of the pregnant woman. Yeah, this Socratic view then is already sort of linked up with something which has a certain scorn for the Odysseus going around looking at the garden, learning what kind of, that there's some fig trees there, white and black fig trees, that they could be hung on the neck during certain rituals to the local ghosts, and learning all the things that the old man Laertes has to pass on, like the Marlon Brando character in the second Godfather when he dies in the garden playing with the young kid and so on. Only in this case, Odysseus was somewhat older, and he was learning about all kinds of things. But although from the text one could it just talks about them pointing out the different trees and things like that, so that it could be considered simply as something like an apprenticeship in a certain way. Like, this is the garden, these are the type of trees, this is how they're to be tended, and so on. But we have the second education, which we then see, for instance, in Aristotle in Delta 4 and Delta 5 sections, where he's talking about well, in Delta 5, okay, he's talking about the meanings of fusus. He's negotiating over the meanings of fusus, just as in the Locus we get this negotiation over the meaning of courage. This negotiation over the meaning of fusus still continues. So now let's look at this. Let me just sort of bookend that. I mean, what were the possibilities? It's like, one, fusus can mean growth, as it was starting to get defined in Odyssey. It wasn't defined in Odyssey, but that's the oldest example we have of the word fusus. But then it's sort of like Aristotle saying, well, here's the way people have been using this word, and one is as growth, another as sort of what the thing looks like, and another he gives the name of the ousia, or the being, and he said this is the most important one. So this whole direct philological action, this direct sort of investigatory action, Socrates is saying that anthropos, the non-human life, is the one that doesn't have this type of investigation. So this direct investigation is what we're still talking about, but it has a specific origin in this type of conversations in Aristotle, which show in an unheimlich way why these discussions are unavoidable, because they're always going to, if you're sort of normotic disorder, like Andrew Wilson, like sort of total normopathy, ultra normopathy, you think sort of like, yeah, here's a few ideas and they're politically active, let's just gear into them and then push this way, push that way. You don't see that back. The reason, for instance, Dugin's so effective is because he doesn't stay, he never just said, oh, these are the political tensions and I'll get on one side or the other. But no, he suggests moving out of this. And how does he move out of this? Because he sees more of what the basic negotiations are, and that they're efficacious. They're efficacious. So just think of the following. I'll just leave with the following example of why, one, since AI doesn't do philosophy, there's a beautiful question in Strauss, right, in Man in the City, and Strauss, that does Homer philosophize? Do the gods philosophize? Does Homer think? Philosophizing and thinking are almost the same, depending on who we ask. Heidegger has specific teaching on it. I say teaching in order not to say something like that Heidegger has opinions on it or something, because then what does the opinion mean? Yeah, so in Everett Pritchard, we have this example. Now try to go from the Nicias thing about courage, it seems less important, but then the Aristotle thing about nature, what is nature, that seems more to touch upon everything. But now see the anthropologist example, the newer people of the southern, um, uh, they call it something like the sub-Nihilic region or something. Newer people, they had no word for time. They had no word for time. So they could not have a prolonged discussion on time, like as we constantly do about nature. What is nature? Is it biology? What is nature? We constantly have discussions about the nature of nature, as it were, stemming from Aristotle's, this Delta 5 section. And from certain ancient texts and so on and so forth. There's been a very long discussion on it. The philologists keep our door open to that. Could AI ever really do that? No, because the only mirror for the AI to have a yardstick to know if it's doing it right is some kind of overlord system of one kind or another. One would be like what most people say. You could make a democratic system, and then it would be kind of like Grok would give the answer that was democratically chosen, or you could have a system where Grok would give the answer that the classical scholars most prefer. You could do an overlord version either way, and then you would determine sort of what would you be determining there. If we would say Grok or some AI that was of the far future, let's say, was a better philologist or a better classical scholar than any living classical scholar, you could almost say they were a better philosopher because they'd have more direct conversation with the texts of the past. Aristotle's metaphysics, for instance, that more directly have a conversation than anyone else according to, as it were, the normative standard. How would this be maintained? Maybe in the way the French Academy maintains the French language and tries to make sure they're not overrun and existentially destroyed, as shown in Wellenbeck's submission.